Ireland and other nations, England, started to react, started to shake off the papal rule. And of course the Roman Church became very anxious and very angry because it had literally dominated Europe. The church, it was like a sort of separate institution from government that had a free hand, and the Pope and his thugs, that's all I can call them, were allowed to go around anywhere, rounding up so-called heretics, murdering people, just putting them away, whatever, just because they stood up against the Roman Catholic Church. Wonderful instruments of torture. Eventually, the Spanish leaders, I think it was King Ferdinand and his wife Isabella, in the 15th century invented the Inquisition. The Inquisition was, I don't know, I wouldn't say it was the Gestapo of its day, but it wasn't far from it. The Inquisition was part of the Roman Church's way of taking in heretics, people they regarded as people who were just not following the church, just not submitting to the Pope's total authority over the church. And any Christian who became a Protestant at the time and believed that Jesus Christ was the head of the church and not the Pope, and started preaching that and started believing or practicing true Christian faith, as the New Testament put it, was likely to find himself on a rack, having his eyes gouged out, being burnt at the stake, anything like that. One of the most well-known people in England of the 16th century was Sir Thomas More. Sir Thomas More is highly regarded by the Roman Church because he died as a martyr, as far as they're concerned. When Henry VIII broke from the Roman Church, he wanted everybody to swear allegiance to him as the head of the Church of England and the sole authority in religious matters. And Thomas More, being a very strong Roman Catholic, refused to do so, and he was beheaded. And I don't know if he's ever been canonized, but I wouldn't put it past the church to canonize him as a saint sooner or later. But what most people don't know is Sir Thomas More was only getting these just desserts. It was just what he'd been doing to all the so-called heretics in earlier years. He wanted to get hold of Tyndale, who was the man who first translated the New Testament into English, and he was adamant that the only fate that he deserved was to be burnt at the stake. And if he could get him, he would relish the opportunity to literally light the match himself and have him burnt at the stake purely for putting the Word of God into the English language. And he went around rounding up all sorts of people. I'm sorry to tell you all this, but I have to, because I stand here as a Christian well aware of Christian history at times. And as I am, it doesn't look good. I'll just finish off with one example. Giordano Bruno, don't know if you know him, but he was an Italian who was burnt by the Inquisition after being tortured for, I think, 7 months, simply because he started advocating some of the findings of modern science which everybody believes today. The story of Galileo is nearly as bad. Everybody knows who Galileo is. He wasn't the first person to say that the earth was actually revolving around the sun rather than the other way around. But Copernicus, who advocated that, only put it in writing when he was at his deathbed because he was scared of the Inquisition. He thought if he says this, they're going to come and say, oh no, the earth is the center of the universe, it's God's earth and everything's going around. That's what the church has taught for centuries. So he was almost the first one to really advocate the solar planetary system that we know today, that nobody, I think, doubts anymore. But at the time, Galileo followed him, and he put it into writing plainly. And he was the one who discovered the 4 moons of Jupiter through the early telescopes they had. And he noticed by studying them that they were going around Jupiter, not going around the Earth. And he came to the conclusion, well, that's it. The moon goes around us like those moons go around Jupiter. I mean, this is basic stuff today. Nobody doubts this. But Galileo was threatened. He battled all his life to try and develop his scientific knowledge under this cloud of threat that the church held over him, that he was a heretic, a potential heretic for teaching things that were undermining church authority and church teaching. Eventually, he wrote a new book where they felt he'd gone one too far, and they called him up in front of the Inquisition. We don't know what happened. We don't know what he was threatened with, but virtually certain they told him, unless you recant, we're going to burn you at the stake. And he recanted and publicly denied what he'd written before. I can only believe that Galileo was under the most extreme pressure to end up doing something like that. All right, that's a pretty sorry history. But as I'm sure you Muslims know, yours is not much better. This is a human problem. This is not a Muslim problem or a Christian problem. Violence in religion, authoritarianism, religious people sitting at the top, looking good, looking dignified, dressing themselves up with all sorts of dignified holy robes, and behind the scenes just executing murder, bloodshed, vindictiveness, just to make everybody, force them into conformity to the system of a religion. It's not something that is the preserve of any one religion, but every religion's had its fair share of it. Parts of the Muslim world today, and I can tell you this as Muslims, if you lived in some countries of the Muslim world, like Iran, that if you just seriously questioned anything in Islam, you would be putting your life on the line. Ali Dashti is a well-known Iranian who, for many years, wrote books about Islam and others, and he never renounced Islam. He stayed a Muslim, but just because he came out with what were seen to be modern liberalistic views, as soon as Ayatollah Khomeini took over, it wasn't long before he was arrested and never heard of again. And his family to this day don't really know what happened to him. They were told things, but he just simply disappeared. And you have that same problem today. What I call the thought police is what the Roman Church had in the Inquisition. And that was people who had the freedom, no government, not the Italian government, not the Spanish government, no government in Catholic Europe could stop these people doing what they were doing. And that was simply to go around beating up, arresting, murdering, killing, whatever, anybody that they thought was a heretic and was not standing by Roman Catholic tradition. And I can tell you that if you went into Saudi Arabia today, they have a thought police of their own there. And they go around Saudi Arabia, they're separate from the normal police, they got a free hand, they do much the same sort of thing. Maybe not to the same degree, I don't know, but I'm just telling you facts. I'm not pointing fingers, I'm sure you can see if I'm pointing them outwardly, I'm pointing them inwardly as well. Well, you can also look and say, as I've heard Christians say, yes, but that's what used to happen. That was before the Protestant Reformation. That was, that's in the Old Testament. That's not what Jesus taught. True Christians would never do such things. Well, I have to even go one further, and even today I still have to hold my tongue. And I just can't get onto a bandwagon here. I just can't point fingers. Recently, as you know, the government of America decided to invade Iraq when George Bush was president. The country was invaded. Nobody from Iraq, as far as I know, asked them to come over, certainly not the government, but not even anybody else there. But the pretext was spun all over television that there were weapons of mass destruction that were being created there. And even though inspectors went in and the Iraqi government gave them some freedom to look around, they couldn't find anything, still in they went. And you know what happened. Today, Iraq is the most dangerous place in the world to live. I mean, you only have to pick up a newspaper every day to just see what's happening in that country. And what has fascinated me, because I go to America almost every year, I have been for the last 12 years, is just to see just the attitude of America to the Iraq war. Now, believe me, there are a lot of Americans who say, no, we don't like what's happened there, that should never have happened. But there are a lot of Americans who say, yes, it was the right thing to do, and we support George Bush, and they voted for him in the second election. But for me, the most gut-wrenching thing is it was mainly the evangelical Christians who did that. It was mainly the Protestant Christians who helped to keep George Bush in power. And I've spoken to many of them, and at times my hair stands on end when I hear them justifying this sort of thing. And one of them I actually, Americans that we know very well, people I hold in very high esteem. I had a conversation with them not long ago, and we were talking about Iraq, and I said, don't you think that was a wrong thing that George Bush did? And they said, oh, no, that was the right thing. They had to do it. So I said, but, there were no weapons of mass destruction there. I said, surely, that was the pretext you gave. Surely you can't justify that war. Oh, no, but Saddam Hussein, he bombed Israel. What did he do? I think he fired a couple of Scud missiles at Israel during the war in Kuwait when America and Iraq were literally at war. But to him, the attack on Israel was an attack on America. Oh, I could go on. But it's very unfortunate. What should the true Christian approach to violence be? James says in 1 verse 20, chapter 1 verse 20 of his epistle, the anger of man does not work the righteousness of God. Never think that you can pick up a sword and that you can go and just put it right through another man and think you're doing God a favor. I read in The Citizen recently, they put quotes there every day, famous quotes, and there was a quote there, I can't remember who said it, but it went like this: the most dangerous man in the world, of all people, is a religious man who thinks he is so right with God that he is entitled to eliminate and annihilate anybody who doesn't agree with him, because if he's not right with him, he's not right with God either. And I agree with that sentiment. Whether Christian or Muslims, doesn't make any difference. You just cannot justify violence in the name of religion today. When you look back into history, sure, God sought to protect what he hoped would be a faithful Israel, and he told them to make sure that the nations round about, who, as far as he were concerned, were reprobate, he could have called them up to judgment himself and wiped them out, and nobody could have pointed a finger at him. But he hoped that Israel would be true to him. But what he found was that after the time of David and Solomon, which was the high water mark of Israel's relationship with God, he found that the people of Israel split into two, Israel and Judah. 10 tribes went northward under Jeroboam. Judah stayed strong under Rehoboam, Solomon's son, and it wasn't long before these two started fighting each other. And if you study it, you'll see it. It's the history of Israel for the next 200 years is a time where Israel turns to idolatry. Well, sorry, that 30 minutes finished. Okay, I'll stop there. I'll carry on a little bit in the rebuttal time and I'll finish it. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for that particular assessment. Certainly from my side, it's not something we hear every day, particularly coming from a Christian side. So I'm glad to see the objective stance that you have taken. If I may just suggest, there were a few tinkling sounds that I heard, so please put off your cell phones. It should have been something I slipped off my mind at inception, but please put off your mobile phones. We don't want any disturbance any further. And I will now call upon Shabir Ali to address us for 35 minutes.